Today on Twin Cam, part 3 of Little Melody's service, as we're going to be checking and adjusting the valve clearances. Now, valve clearances aren't something I've ever done before because I've never owned an overhead valve engine and I've never owned an engine that requires you to adjust them manually. So this will be a bit of a learning curve for me, and hopefully for any of you, if you've never done it before, we can both learn something today. So this will be nice and fun, and it should be quite a simple job. If you didn't see part 1 and part 2 of Melody's service, then I'll put a card up in that corner to part 1, where we change the oil and see generally how much of a state this engine might end up being at some point. But you'll notice the car is off the stands that it was on in part 2 of the service, where we had no hub on this corner of the car. And all that will be coming in a future video, but I've left quite a bit of time between doing these 3 videos because I've just kind of been using the car and I'm just slowly ticking off all the jobs I have to do. So over the past few weeks, Melody has been the car I've been using every day, mainly because this car behind the camera is on stands in the garage because it's having some brake work done. So Melody has been the car I've been using every day, and she's been virtually perfect. About 45 mpg on a run, which is good for a 70-odd-year-old engine in a 40-year-old body shell. And although the engine and gearbox aren't perfect, they seem pretty good. So the more work I do, the better she's going to get, and hopefully she should genuinely become a really nice, good example of a Metro in due course. So the first things we have to do before we actually start doing the valve clearances, I'm going to take off the airbox and air intake pipe because that gets in the way a little bit, and you'll notice that around the rocker cover I've already placed a new cork gasket, and that's because I want to make it be the correct shape before I put it on. So I've left that round there for the morning while I've been doing other stuff, and I'll leave it round there when I take it off. So by the time we need it, when we put it on properly later, it should be in the correct shape. So we don't technically need to take off this air intake, but it just gives us a little bit more working room around the whole rocker assembly, which is just under the rocker cover here, right on top of the engine. But before we actually get into doing the valve clearances, I'm going to do one other thing that is related to the last video. You'll notice I've taken a HT lead off here, and that's because I'm going to be checking the condition of one of the spark plugs. I put these plugs in, obviously brand new, last time, and I didn't pay any attention to the condition of the old plugs because the car hadn't been driven very much before I took those old plugs out, and so they weren't an indication of how the car was running. So taking this plug out here should give us a little bit of an indication as to what the engine's doing. Now, I don't know what I'm talking about, so there you go. I think that indicates that it's running a bit lean, the engine. Now, that was what I thought it was doing anyway, just because of the sound of the engine and stuff like that. It's not too lean as to, be seriously worrying, but yeah, that needs turning up a little bit. Now, I'm going to leave that to someone else, because I don't want to start messing around with my carburetor and end up breaking anything, or turning it so far out that it doesn't run anymore. So I also think the timing needs doing as well, which again I'm going to leave to someone else because I want it bob on, and that's something I'll learn in the future, I'm sure. But for now, I'm going to take that as yes, my thought that it was running a bit lean was correct. And we'll get on with doing the valve clearances. That shall do. So before we discuss kind of what we're actually going to be achieving here by doing the valve clearances, I'm just going to whip this rocker cover off so we can kind of see what's underneath. Now this is 5/8 of an inch. These 2 little bolts on top. Now, apart from through the oil filler cap, I've never actually seen what kind of state the rocker assembly is on this car, and to be fair, no matter what it looks like, I still don't think I'm going to be able to understand because, I don't know very much about these things, and if something's really horrendously worn, I might be able to tell, but yeah, this is all kind of first time thing for me, so so this is all about learning. So there we go. That is our rocker assembly, and that is the old gasket. Now it is a cork gasket that's been used, and I don't know how well you can see that because I can't see the viewfinder, but that is a very, very worn gasket, and it was leaking all over the front of the engine. Not horrendously, but it was leaking, so yeah, that's going in the bin. Obviously we have the new one to go on. So as I said, this is our rocker assembly. So we have valve number 1 here, valve number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So obviously these valves are what allow the fuel and air into the combustion chambers, which is then ignited, and then one of them does the exhaust. So you have the valve springs here to allow the valves to shut again, and then the rocker assemblies push down on the valves to open them. And they're actuated by push rods, which are along the back here and are acted on by the camshaft, which is down in the bowels of the engine. So what we're actually adjusting is the clearance in here, in between the top of the valve stem, where the valve spring is, and this rocker arm here. So that clearance is what we're adjusting. We adjust that by, this nut here is a locking nut, and then that flathead screw there, we'll adjust that, turn it anti-clockwise to increase the clearance, and turn it clockwise to decrease the clearance. So next thing we need to do is figure out exactly what we're doing here, because that's a different issue entirely. So in order to find out what we're actually doing, the best place to turn on a car that, if a car is old enough to need manually checked valve clearances, then the likelihood is it's going to tell you how to do it in the owner's handbook. Modern car owners' handbooks don't tell you anything really, they just tell you not to drink battery acid. But in an older car's thing, it will usually tell you how to do these things, so it should tell us the clearance and the order in which to do them. So maintenance procedures 41. That's oil. There you go, valve rocker clearance. So it's telling us here the order in which to check the valve clearances. Now there is this thing called the rule of 9, which people who actually know what they're talking about know. I've heard of it, but I don't actually know what it entails and what it means. So I'm just going to do kind of what it says in the book. So it says here that we need to check number 1 valve with number 8 fully open. Now I believe the rule of 9 means if you add the number of valves together you get 9. The number the valve is. I'm sure you get what I mean, but yeah, I'm just going to check it from the book. So we need to check number 1 valve, which is this one here, and the reason it's this one is because usually cylinder number 1 and valve number 1 is on the timing end of the engine. So the timing end is usually, the timing end is definitely the end with the belts on it. So that end is usually number 1. So although it looks backwards to the way we read things in the West, we are 1 on the right, 8 on the left hand side of the engine bay. So we need to do number 1 valve with number 8 fully open, 3 with 6, 5 with 4, 2 with 7, and they all add up to 9. So there you go, I figured out what the rule of 9 means now. So that tells us the order to do them. We need to find out our clearance now. So if we go back to the contents, general data is on page 71. So that's 1 litre models, 1.3 models. So valve clearance cold, inlet and exhaust, all models 0.3 to 0.5 0.3 to 0.35 millimeters. So I'm going to set them to 0.3, I think, or just over 0.3. So to make sure, well, to see what the clearance is, we have a set of feeler gauges. So that's these things. You use these for doing things like spark plug gaps and stuff like that. And you have a number of these little gauges here, which have a number on them. So that is 0.3. So what we're going to do is we're going to slide this between the valve stem and the rocker arm, and it should be a sliding fit between the two. And then we know we've got it spot on. If it's a bit tight, we'll loosen it. If it's a bit loose, then we'll tighten it. So as the book said, we need to check valve number 1 while number 8 is open. So we need to get valve number 8 open. And the way we would usually do that is to put a big socket on the crank pulley and to turn over the engine until you see all the valve springs moving and number 8 is fully open. Unfortunately, on a Metro, at least a Metro with an A-series engine, you can't get at the crank pulley to put a socket on it because an engine mount's in the way. So the way you do it is either push the car along with it in gear, which isn't exactly acceptable because of my driveway and all that kind of stuff. So the next best thing is to turn on the alternator. So the alternator is on the front of the engine here, and it's obviously belt driven from the engine. So if we apply a little bit more belt tension, put a socket on the end of the alternator, we should be able to turn the entire engine over. Now, an Austin A-series engine turns clockwise, as do most engines in the world, even though the engine looks as though it's the wrong way round in the engine bay. The engine turns clockwise relative to the timing end of the engine, but the wheels turn anti-clockwise relative to the timing end of the engine. So it sounds the wrong way round, but I'm assured that it is correct. So what we need to do is get that valve all the way open. So if I put this socket on the end of the crank pulley, sorry, alternator pulley, and apply a little bit more belt tension, should get the engine turning. There we go, you see? So there is some compression in there that I'm having to turn against, but it's not too bad so that I'm not able to turn it. So we need to get that valve all the way open. So that number 8 valve now is all the way open. So the valve spring is completely compressed, the rocker arm is down, pushing down on the valve to open it. So now we can check number 1. So now we can get our feeler gauge with the 0.3 of a millimetre and we can slide it in there. I thought that was a little bit tight at first, but I think, I don't know how well you can see this because of the thermostat housing and all that, that is just about right. Maybe a tiny bit too tight, but I think I'm going to leave that one. Yep, so that number 6 valve is fully open, so we can check number 3. Now again, that is about perfect. So I'm just going to keep going through this, and if we encounter any of the valves that need adjusting, then we'll come back and we will actually adjust them. So we're back because we've found an issue. So currently we have valve number 1 completely open, i.e. that spring is fully compressed. So we need to check number 8. And that will not slide into that clearance on top of the spring, so we're going to have to adjust it. So let me go and get some tools. So some tools have been acquired. Unfortunately not the right ones, but yeah, that's just rather typical for me. So we need to undo this lock nut here, and so the best thing to do is to get a spanner, and I'll get to why in a minute. Instead I have a socket because I couldn't find any Imperial spanners and I didn't want to go rounding any of these off. So there you go, I'll get to why it's not the best in a minute, but for now we have loosened that off already. So you can see there you go, so that's now nice and loose. So I also have, I've put that down, I also have a flathead screwdriver, so the screwdriver goes in there and we will turn it clockwise to close the clearance, and we'll turn it anti-clockwise to open the clearance. So I need my little feeler gauge again. So that now is a perfect sliding fit. So we've adjusted that clearance to exactly 0.3 of a millimetre, which is perfect. So now what we need to do is to lock that nut again. And here's where the problems come in. Because if you're holding a spanner around there, you can have the screwdriver in there, so you can make sure that the clearance doesn't change. I have a socket. So this probably is going to take a million goes and probably just isn't going to work at all. So after a bit of trial and error, because I'm using a socket like an idiot, I have managed to get the valve adjusted, the clearance adjusted and the nut tightened, and that now is a very nice sliding fit on that 0.3 of a millimetre. So that's good. I have just adjusted my first valve. I'm very pleased. So I'm going to carry on and do the rest. So that there is the last valve checked. So that is a complete set. All the clearances have been checked. The only one that was off is that one, number 8. Number 7 might be a little bit too tight, but I'm not going to adjust it because, again, I don't quite have the right tools. So I'm pleased to see that all the valves are actually kind of virtually correctly set. So that is a good little bit of peace of mind that at least one of the adjustments on this engine is correct. So it's now the early evening. I've had that gasket sat around the valve cover for quite some time, and I've just placed it on top of the engine and it seems to be in the right kind of shape now, so that's good. While I was in there, I decided to give the valve cover itself a really good clean. So though it's got little bits of rust on it and stuff like that, it is at least now perfectly clean. I just need kind of an engine bay to go with the cleanliness of this, but here we are. I've also even polished up the bolts on the top. Why I bothered, I don't know, but I was sat this afternoon a little bit bored, so that's what I decided to do. I have a new oil filler cap on the way, because you're meant to change these as a service thing. So I've got a new one of them on the way because this one is a little bit eaten up anyway. So yeah, I've cleaned out all the gunk from inside it, and I've cleaned out also obviously the mating face for the gasket and the engine. So final thing to do is obviously to put this on the car. So now we can put the air cleaner back on top and tighten it down. And there we go. A nice looking valve cover that needs a matching rest of engine bay. So there you go, there's another one of the little things that I've been meaning to do on Melody for a little while. So there you go, there's something I've done that's new as well today. So I'm quite pleased with myself, even if, you know, realistically, the valves were in decent shape anyway. They didn't really need all that much adjusting. So that now means that we don't have very many more things to do that are routine on this car. I am going to do another one of these servicing videos where we grease the suspension and pump up the suspension as well, because it's a bit low on the back and I've no idea when the suspension was last greased. So until then, I suppose, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, then please do click like and subscribe to TwinCam as well. I'm forever indebted to my wonderful Patreon supporters, so if you'd like to support me that way, then please do follow the link in the description. And I'll have more videos coming along soon.